Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas and this is how to create an RPG in Unity, and welcome to episode 43. In this tutorial we're going to bring in our enemy into this arena at last, the enemy being the skeleton. We're going to play around with some of his animations to see what he can do, and we're also going to create a little cutscene to begin that boss battle with the skeleton. Don't forget, click on the subscribe button and click on that bell icon as well to stay up to date with every tutorial still to come in this series, and indeed everything else about game development on my channel. With that in mind, let's get to work. So hopefully at this point you guys have built up your little arena a bit more than what I have done. All I've really done is just add a couple of cubes here and there, just kind of build the walls up, and I've also added them here as well because I have a little corridor going on here. And this is where our little moving platform is. So the idea of what we're going to create here is we come off the moving platform, down here, and then we trigger a little cutscene here, which kind of focuses in on our boss to start the boss battle. And that's where we're going to go from there. So I think the best place for us to start at this point, assuming you guys have built up your arena, unlike me, we just import the skeleton. Now, if you can't remember where we got it from, it was from the asset store, and it was Fantasy Monster Skeleton. It is indeed free, but packages do change price from time to time, so just keep that in mind. If you want to use a different enemy, you can, no problem. The same principle will apply. So let's go to our skeleton, and I can't remember which folder it's in. Well, it's in the enemies folder, but let's try searching. So SKEL, oh, and there we are. There's a skeleton folder. Oh, it's actually in Fantasy Monster, not enemies. Maybe we should drag it over at some point. Anyway, let's take our character and let's drag him into the scene. Let's increase his size to, gosh, I don't know, 25, 25, 25. Is he big enough? He looks too small. Let's have 35, 35, 35. Let's have him probably about that big. Does that look relative? Yeah, that looks relative to me. He looks kind of large as well, so gives the whole boss impression. Let's rotate him -90, so he's facing this way. And I'm going to move him there. So first things first, let's give him an animation. So as the cutscene looks a little bit more, well, I suppose realistic, really. So the skeleton itself, if I press play and go back to the scene view up here, rather than have to go all the way through the game, to see what it looks like, because we only want to test it and see what the skeleton looks like at the moment. We don't really want to play the game. We know what it's going to look like through the game. So Unity is just on a go slow there. So let's head back to scene. So currently he's in his standard T-pose and we want some animations on him. So let's stop that. I'm going to right click on the skeleton and remove component on the animator, simply because we don't want it. Let's go to the Annie folder, which is the animations, and you'll see we've got a couple of different ones here, but the one we're going to start with is idle, this one. So if we take that, take idle, hold control, press D to duplicate, that will extract it out and we're able to freely use it. Now we just need to click, or rather tick, loop time. That just means the animation will play over and over and over, which is exactly what we want. Next thing to do is to drag and drop that animation onto our skeleton right there. And now if we click back on our skeleton and go to the animator, we'll be able to see by default idle is the one. That's exactly what we want. So let's press play again now and then head back to scene, and we should see him animating idle. Perfect. Okay, so let's get that cutscene in place now. I do kind of want some bars at the top and bottom, just because I feel it'll add a little bit more kind of cutscene-y feel to it. Is cutscene a word? Well, it is now. Just more of a cutscene feel to it. So to do that, game object, we'll go to UI, and let's go raw image to make it nice and easy. Let's anchor it at the top in the middle. In fact, we'll anchor it top stretch because we want it to stretch no matter what. And let's put it in position. And we just need to basically get it just right. So to do that, let's have, let's go 50 and 50. See how it looks. Okay, fair enough. And let's just stretch that into position. So let's say round about there. And bring it, there we go. Perfect. So that should be perfectly aligned with every side of the screen now, obviously because it is stretched. And let's colour that black. I'm going to right click and rename. Let's call this cut scene bar top. And then let's hold Control, press D to duplicate. And we'll change the anchoring position to stretch bottom and bring it down to there. And let's rename that to cutscene bar bottom. And what I'm going to do is on the cutscene top bar, I'm going to right click and create empty and just extract that out of there, just so as it becomes its own empty game object. And I'm going to zero out the position so it's dead center and then drag and drop the two cutscene bars onto that game object and rename it as cutscene bars. So if we press play now, let's see how this looks. So you can see there, hopefully, the bars don't look too bad. Maybe a little bit too big for the window that we have now. However, keep in mind that when we are in full screen, which I will do at the end of this tutorial, we'll see how it should look for real. So if you can imagine, I'm just going to go a little bit further here. Oops, without falling off. Without falling off. Dear me. There we go. So if you can imagine, this is what our cutscene would look like. The bars come in and we zoom in on our skeleton right there. So in order to get this working, we need to create another camera. So I'm going to zoom back in on our skeleton and then game object, and let's go to camera. Now, I'm going to take this camera and place it just over here because we're going to start the cutscene over here. So let's rotate that into position. Probably have it round about there. So the cutscene will trigger before we actually get to the end. So we're going to trigger it round about here. So let's now animate that camera. So let's go to animations and go to Dungeon 001, or just 01 in this case. And let's rename our camera first of all and call it Cut Scene Cam. And let's go to the animation and create. Let's call this Cut Scene 01. And let's press record button. So let's set the first keyframe. So basically we need to retype what is in here now. So 58.38. Let's take the Y position and Z, which is 94.54. Rotation, I'm going to set as 1 and back to 0. 1 and back to 0. And obviously the reason I'm doing that is just to briefly set that keyframe. Same with Y, so 32.53. Now, the next thing we need to kind of work out is how fast are we wanting this cutscene to play out. So I'm kind of thinking I want to get the cutscene round to here in about 5 seconds, maybe less, and then another, let's say 3 seconds, then another 3 seconds kind of slowly zooming into him to give that kind of impression of, ooh, he's an enemy. So what we're going to do is 3 seconds, so that'll be frame 180. We are going to have our camera over here. Let's rotate there. Let's say, how's about that? About there maybe. And then another 180, so 180, so 360 in total. So maybe a little bit more, kind of zoom in just to about there. So obviously you can take much more time creating this cutscene. I'm just kind of skipping through it, rushing through it to kind of just give that illustration of what it will look like. So to figure out what it will look like, I am going to turn off our FPS controller and I'm going to press play. Okay, so we can see there. Yeah, okay. It cuts through the wall. So what we need to do is we need to kind of work around that. So if we go back to our camera down here, and on the animation, like I say, we need to avoid that. Now we can either kind of cheat a little bit and get rid of this wall here, or we can move it, and I guess it's entirely up to you. I'm actually going to cheat and do that. So then we trigger it here as expected. So now we shouldn't have any problems. Cool. There's our skeleton. So next thing we need to do is create that trigger, and it's probably worth adding the post-processing as well. So before we do anything else, let's add that post-processing profile. So in the folder, runtime, post-processing profile goes on here, and we need to add the dungeon profile right there. So next thing, let's create that trigger. So game object, 3D object and cube, and let's place this cube just before the end of this section here, so probably around about there. And since we will be the only thing to actually interact with this at any given point, there's no point adding a tag to it. I mean, realistically, yeah, maybe you could, but then that's just unnecessarily adding more code than what you actually need at this point. So let's set that across, not the rotation, that would be silly, to about there. And let's turn off the mesh renderer, and now let's create the script for that trigger. So there's a couple of things we also need to add in. I'd like to add in fading, and I'd also like to add in, take away the minimap and any cursor that we have on, because we don't actually need them during a cutscene. So let's go to scripts and dungeon, and right click, create C# script, cut scene 01. And let's open that up in Visual Studio. So while we think about what variables we're going to need, let's try and get to the end point of what we want here. All we want is to be able to trigger this just once to zoom in on the boss and then be able to resume play. So resuming play from this cutscene is the end result. So let's make sure we get there. So we don't need void start or void update because this is a trigger. We do, however, need the player. So public game object, the player, semicolon. We also need that cutscene camera. So public game object, cut cam, semicolon. Next thing, we're going to need that object for the 2 bars that we created earlier. So public game object, cut bars, semicolon. We need one for the cursor in the screen. So public game object, the cursor, semicolon. And finally, the minimap. So public game object, mini map, semicolon. So here we're going to go void on trigger, enter. Doesn't need to be private, so we can get rid of that. And when we enter the trigger, we need to basically, in fact, we need to add 2 more variables, don't we? We need 2 fades, so fade out and fade in. So what I'm going to do is head back here and go back to my canvas, which is somewhere. Fade out and fade in. Now, if I recall, the fade in doesn't get turned off, but that doesn't really make too much of a difference. If you recall, was it a last tutorial we did it? I think it was last tutorial. We had this ledge catchment. So I'm just going to reopen that ledge respawn script. And if you remember, we just play fade screen in, which is the best thing to do in that instance. So back to the cutscene trigger. What we need to do here is we need to say, firstly, to add the variable into public game object fade in, as well as public game object fade out. The fade out is going to be what we use first. So the fade out we need to turn on. So fade out dot set active true, and that should automatically play that fade out. The next thing we're going to want to do is basically, after a certain amount of time, we need to turn off the player, turn on the new camera, and do everything else. So at this point, we need to start a coroutine. So start coroutine, in brackets, let's call this anything at all. So skeleton cut. Open close bracket, semicolon. And that means that we now need to write that coroutine. So I enumerator skeleton cut. Open close bracket, open curly bracket. So we're going to want to yield, return new, wait for seconds, and I can't actually remember how long our actual sequence is. I think it may be 2 seconds, but we may have to change that, so we'll see. So yes, wait for 2 seconds. Then after 2 seconds, what we'll do is cut cam dot set active true. Cut bars dot set active true. The player set active false. Now the reason we do that is because we don't need the player to be active. We only want the cutscene camera to be active. So false. Yeah, that's right. Semicolon. Next thing, let's turn the cursor and the minimap off. So the cursor dot set active false. And yeah, like I said, minimap dot set active false, semicolon. So next thing, let's establish what we're going to do. Are we going to have the fade screen in as it kind of starts moving? I think that might be a good idea, to be honest. So I'm going to say fade in. In fact, do you know what? Let's copy this line of code. Because why should we retype it when it already exists in Ledge Respawn? So let's place that there. So fade in, get component, animation, play, fade screen, in. Perfect. So the animation now is going to last for 6 seconds. So we need to yield, return, new, wait for seconds. Now, I'm going to play the fade out. Trying to think, I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's head back into Unity and let's go to the animation we created and just make sure we have that set as, if I can find it, which one was it? Cutscene 1. Make sure we untick loop time. We only want to play once. So that means we can basically play the fade out animation on this camera once again, either between 4 seconds or however many seconds after, because we could effectively have, you know, the cutscene running for 8, 9, 10 seconds or whatever now, even though it's only 6 seconds long, because it will stop at the end and it'll just look at the skeleton. So I'm going to say wait for seconds 6, semicolon. What I might do as well is I'll keep the fade out on. I won't turn it off because we'll just play the animation again. So after 6 seconds, we will say, let's double check what the fade out animation is called so we get the correct one. So let's head to fade out. And so it's fade screen out. So fade out dot get component, brackets, animation. And obviously if you're using animator, then yep, that will be what that is. Play, fade, screen out. And semicolon. And then let's wait for another 2 seconds. So yield, return, new, wait for seconds 2, semicolon. And obviously you'll probably need to refine a lot of this just to make sure the timing is perfect on everything. So you take the time to refine this. I'm not going to do it in this tutorial because I'd just be wasting time. I will obviously do it off camera because I don't want to waste your time. After that, after we've waited, we need to say the player is back on. So set active true. The cut cam goes off. Cut cam dot set active false. the cut bars now go off. So cut bars dot set active false. We need the minimap and the cursor back on. So the cursor dot set active true, and the it's minimap, isn't it? Minimap dot set active true semicolon, and I'll save it there for now. I don't think it's complete in the sense of, you know, a nice smooth run, but it will at least give us a starting place for this cutscene now. So let's head back into Unity and wait for the script to compile. Should have no errors. Perfect. So let's go down to that cube we created and rename it to cut trig. And that reminds me as well, we need to turn off the box collider, don't we? Otherwise, we're going to be able to re-trigger this over and over. So let's head back to the void on trigger enter method and have this dot get component spiky brackets box collider open close bracket dot enabled equals false semicolon and resave. Obviously, the reason for that, like I say, we don't want to re-trigger this over and over and over and over. So that's saved again. So let's head to our scripts folder, dungeon 001, and cutscene 01 goes onto the trigger. Let's take this opportunity to turn the cutscene camera off, just so as it doesn't start itself. And let's add that to cutcam, and then scroll all the way up, and let's add in FPS controller as the player. And next is fade in. So we'll add that there. Fade out, that there. The cutscene bars right there. Cursor. Let's see, where is it? Where is the cursor? I cannot actually remember. Which one is it? Which one is it? I can't remember. Okay, well, let's add the minimap for now. Whilst I remember which one is the cursor. I think it's this. Is it this one? It is. So it's them two together. So what we'll do is let's add them as a game object. So right click, create empty game object, and let's take this opportunity to call it cursor and add those two raw images in there. And finally, let's add that to the script. And finally, turn FPS controller on, save the scene, and let's give this a go. Oh, that reminds me, we need to turn the bars off, don't we? Because they will appear throughout the game. So let's turn them off and try once again. Now the great thing is, our health bar is covered by the cursor, so we don't really need to worry about turning it off. Although you could do if you wanted to, by all means, but yeah, it's up to you. Let's keep going. And we should trigger it somewhere here. Okay, I see what's happened there. So, because we haven't turned off fade screen, it's basically staying on and staying black. So we need to make sure we turn that off just here. This is what you call playtesting and error fixing. So fade out dot set active false semicolon, which also means when we have it here, we need to turn it back on. So we need to repeat this line of code just here and save. Now this time we shouldn't have any problems whatsoever. We should be able to just go through and no problems. Down the gap, down we are. Let's go across. I'd love to see what you guys have created so far. Obviously a lot of the stuff I do is kind of incomplete in some ways because I just show you how to do these things, and yeah. Nice. Okay, so once again, we have to turn fade out off at the end there. Obviously, the reason being, if we don't, it just means that we can't see anything. So everything will have worked as normal there. The only difference being, because fade out was still on, it was just still on the screen. So let's try that one more time, and I will tell you what we're going to do in the next tutorial. So next time what we're going to do is we are going to focus a lot more on our enemy. We are going to add in something called Navmesh, like we've dealt with before, but on a slightly different scale, because he is going to be obviously the boss. So we're going to have a battle with him, create all the scripts. So we'll deal a little bit with what we had. Do you remember the spiders? So it'll be kind of similar to that, except we'll do a lot more. And I really, really can't play video games very well. So yeah, that's all coming in the next tutorial. So until then, guys, let's take a look at our skeleton. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.